Hey guys, Kamal here back again with another video. So today we are going to get to know about CSS. So this video is part of the web development crash course series, and if you haven't seen the previous videos, then I highly suggest you to see that, and once you're done with that, then you can carry on from here. So this is the CSS crash course, and let's get this started. Alright, so first things first. What is CSS? So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So as the name implies, it's a style sheet used to stylize the HTML pages. So in the previous videos, we have seen how to create the basic structure for a website using HTML. So in this video, we are going to use CSS to stylize that website to make it look a bit more intriguing to our eyes. So let's get this started. So here I have a folder named as CSS Crash Course. Instead of that folder, I have two files. The first one is index.html, which is the homepage for our website, as well as a style.css file. So let's forget about that file for now, and let's only worry about the index.html. So in the HTML page, I have the basic skeleton structure for the HTML, and in that, I have a h1 tag with a class called as heading and a paragraph tag with a class name of paragraph. So let's open this with live server and let's see what we have. So click on open with live server. Okay, so this is what we have for now. So we have the heading and we have the paragraph. So we have black text on white background, right? So let's change that. So there is actually three ways in which you can actually include the CSS file or include the styling inside the HTML. The first one is doing it by the inline CSS. So as the name implies inline, we are going to directly include the style part inside the HTML tag. So in the angle brackets beside the class, you can actually include another attribute called as style. So in that attribute, you can actually define the style properties that you want. So for now, let's change the color of the text. So by default, it's black, right? So let's give an attribute or let's give a property named as color. So in CSS, you can actually give the name of the property. So it's going to be color, then give a colon, and then you can give the color. So it's going to be blue for now. And after that, you're going to end the line with a semicolon. So let's save that and let's see what we have. So we have a heading with a blue color. Similarly, you can change it to red, green, yellow, whatever you want. So along with that, after the colon, after the semicolon, you can give another property if you want. So let's give font size. So in CSS, you're going to define it by font hyphen size. So it's going to change the size of the font. So there are actually multiple units that you can use to refer to the size. There are pixels, there are percentages, there are EMs and REMs, all of that. We're going to see later on what they are. But for now, let's go with pixels. So a pixel is a unit that is used to measure the size. Okay. So for now, let's give it as, let's say 150 pixels and end it with a semicolon and save that. So we have a very big text here. So this is a heading, right? Similarly, you can add another properties as well. So this is one way of directly including the style inside the heading, inside the tag. But this is actually not preferred way, because you have to actually include the style in each and every tag that you want the property to be applied. So let's say you want the same property to be applied to the paragraph as well, then you have to copy that and paste it here. Or if you want another property, then you have to write style again and you have to change the property. So because of doing that, it's going to increase the code length. Along with that, it's going to make our HTML look more complex. So we don't want that. So to avoid that, there's another way that you can do. Okay, so you can do the same thing by actually including a style tag inside the head. So similar to how we have a title tag, a head tag, a body tag, a h1, a paragraph, similar to all of those tags, we have another tag called as style. So it's going to be style. Click on tab. So any code that you write in between the style tags, that is the opening and the closing style tag, that is considered to be CSS style. Okay, so anything that is present in between these two style tags is going to be considered as CSS. So the way that you actually apply the property is that, let's say you want to apply a color of red to the heading. The way that you can do is, let's first remove this. Let's remove the style. the inline style and save it. Yeah. Then in between the style tags, what you can do is you can just use the selector. So the syntax for using this method is you have to first give the selector. So for now we are going to select the h1 tag. So you can just type in h1 and after that given the curly braces. So in between these curly braces we are going to define the property. So we are going to define the color and let's give it as, let's say, red, and then give a semicolon. You can give another properties as well, but for now let's just change the color. So now it's in the default color, so it's the black color. Once you save it, you're going to have the heading with a red color, right? So this is actually the CSS part, okay? So this h1 with the curly braces is the original CSS part, whereas the style property or the style tag is just used to define that anything present in between these two is the CSS. So this is another way of actually defining the CSS, okay? So this is another way of defining the styling part. So you can actually do the same thing for a paragraph as well. And along with that, instead of directly taking the h1, so what happens is that when you have multiple h1s, this color property of red will be applied to all the h1s. Let's say you don't want that to happen and you only want one paragraph or one heading or any single element in the whole HTML to have that property. Then what you can do is you can use classes or IDs. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have a class with a property attached to it in the previous videos. So the way we do it that is actually, instead of having a h1 here, what you can do is you can just remove that h1. Instead of that, you can give the name of the class. So it's going to be heading. So the thing here is that since it's in white color, it means that it's not being selected. So the thing here is that when you want to actually select a class, in the previous video we have seen that we are going to use a dot. So whenever you use a dot, it's going to define that whatever comes after that dot is a class name. And if you use a hash, then whatever comes after the hash is going to be an ID name, okay? So right now we are going to use class. So you're going to first define a dot and after that you're going to type the class name. So this color property of red will be applied to the tag which has a class name of heading. Right now that class name of heading is being done to the h1. So this h1 will have a red color. So let's change that to, let's say, green and save it. Then you're going to have a h1 with a green color. Similarly, you can give other properties as well. So the other way is using a hash for IDs. And remember, for the most of the videos I'm going to use classes, so you're going to see more of dot rather than hashes. Okay, so this is more beneficial than the h1 itself, as you can actually apply that to multiple elements if you want, or to a single element. So what I mean by that is that, let's say you have another h1 tag or something like that. If you want the color property of green, then you can just give the class name of heading. So let's say you want to apply another property but not a color property. Let's say this is another heading. So let's say you have another heading. So what you can do is you can define another class. Let's name it as test, and let's give the property of font size. Okay, so you can define the font size, right? So let's give the font size as, let's say, 150 pixels. And sorry about that. Yeah. So what you can do is you can actually give another class here. Okay, so beside the heading you can give the class of test, which is going to add the heading part, like it's going to add the properties from the heading and as well as the properties from the test as well. So let's save that and see. Okay, so we have the text which is big and it's also green. So you can actually apply the same property to the class, to the heading 2 using test. So the second heading is also going to become big. So you can have multiple classes as well in a single element. Okay, so that's how you define the properties associated to classes. Similarly, you can define that for IDs as well, but classes are more versatile. Okay, so this is the second way of actually including the style inside the HTML, but this is also not preferably used by many people. So the problem here is that if you include this in the head part, then the head section is going to become a lot more complex and it's going to become more cluttered, so the code is going to get cluttered with the CSS and the HTML, and you're going to get confused on what's doing what. Okay, so to avoid that, what you can do is you can actually create another file, and for this video I have created a file called style.css. so that's the file I was talking about earlier. So you can create a file for just specific for CSS code. So for now I've created a file called style.css. so that .css is used to define a CSS file. Okay, similar to how we have .html extension, here we have the .css extension. So the way that you actually use this is, since in the style part, like in between these two style tags, we have the text, right? So just copy this text or cut this text from here and paste that in the style.css file. So this is the core CSS. Okay, just save that, and here remove the style tags. You don't need that tag. Instead of adding the style tag, what you can do is you can add a link tag. Okay, so we have a link, right? So just type in link and click on tab. That is going to generate the link tag. So in that we have two attributes. The first one is the rel, that is the relationship, and the second one is the href, that is a hyperlink reference. So the first part, that is the relation, is going to define what type of file that we are actually linking to. Okay, so right now we are trying to link the HTML to a file which is used for stylizing, right? So we are trying to link the style.css file to the index.html file. So that style.css is a style sheet for the index.html. So that's the relation that these two files have. And whereas the href is used to reference to the source file for the styling. Similar to how we have a tag and you have the reference, right, where you give the HTTPS and you give the address. Okay, you give the location of that on the internet or on the browser. Similarly, you can have a style file present inside the internet as well. So you can give the HTTP location, or you can just add that file locally. So right now we have that file locally named as style.css. So if that file is in the same directory as the index.html, then you can give it directly as style.css. So that's the name of the file. But let's say if you have the files categorized, and let's say you have this style.css in a folder called as CSS. So let's keep this in the CSS folder. So if you have this style.css file in a CSS folder, then the way that you access it is, first you have to give a dot, then give a slash. After you're given that, you're going to be presented with options. Okay, so you have the option of selecting the index.html file, that is the file we are currently working on, or the folder. Click on that and then click on style.css. So what it means is that we are going to first go to the CSS folder, and from there inside that folder we are going to select the style.css file. So we are going to do this only when you have the style.css file in subfolders. Okay, if you have that way of categorization, then you have to use that. But since we have the file present in the same directory as the index.html and we don't have any folders, then you can directly include that. Okay, that style.css. So now that the linking is done with the style sheet, so any property present inside the style sheet will automatically be applied based on the class name that you have given. So let's save that and refresh, and you're not going to see any changes as the same property you have here. So let's just check that. Let's change the color from green to blue, and let's remove the text as well so that we have a smaller text, and save it. So we have the text with the blue color. So now we are done with doing the linking part, and we are done with seeing how you can actually use the CSS. So now let's see some of the main properties that you apply in CSS. So the first and the main part that you apply generally is the asterisk. So the asterisk, it is used to actually select all the elements present inside the HTML. So what it means is that any property that you apply for the any property that you apply by using the asterisk selector, that property will be applied to all the elements present inside the HTML. So let's say you give a color of red, then automatically this property of red color will be applied to all the text present inside the HTML. Generally you have to select the h1 or a p tag or a class name, right? But this asterisk is used to select all the elements. Similarly, you can select the body. You can just directly select the body and you can apply some colors properties as well. So another main property that you generally use is the background. Okay, so this color property is used to define the text color or the font color, whereas the background is used to define the overall color of the component. Okay, so it's going to define the background color of that component, not the text or the elements present inside that component. So you can give a background color of, let's say, blue for now, or let's give it as black, and let's give the color of the text as white. Okay, let's do that. So give the semicolon and save it, and that's going to give a black background with a white text color. So instead of giving it as black or white or red, or like defining the colors using the text, because when you define it using text, there will be only specific colors that you can use. So instead of that, if you want to fully utilize the color spectrum, then what you can do is you can give the hex code of that particular color. So the thing here is that every color present in the color spectrum will have a particular hex code to it. So you can you have multiple units of representing it. So you can use a hex code to represent a particular color, or you can use a RGB values, or you can use HSL values, or you can just use plain text. So these are the main ways that you can represent colors. So the main popular, like the most popular one, is the hash hex code. So it's going to be defined using the hash. Okay, so the way you define black color using the hex code is you give a hash. For any color you give a hash first, then later on you're going to have 6 zeros. So that is going to define the black color. Okay, you have the black color here, right? And if you give it as 6F 1 2 3 4 5 6, then that is going to be the white color. Okay, so here when you hover over it, you're going to be notified with a color spectrum where you can actually choose the hex code. Okay, so let's say you want a color but you don't know the code for that, then what you can do is you can select a color from here and you can point out that color. Automatically that code will be placed here. So that is a simple way of actually selecting the hex code in Visual Studio Code. So as you have the hex code, similarly you have the RGB as well. So you can define the RGB values. So generally they are, I think, around 3 values present normally. Yeah, so this is going to define the blue color. Here as well you can go to the color spectrum. When you highlight it, you can select any color that you want. Okay, you can select any color. It's going to define the RGB. So along with that, you can actually select the opacity as well. So for RGB, it's normally RGB, and along with that you're going to have another one, that is A. So when I hover over the opacity slider, you're going to have an A as well. So when I drag it to the top, it's going to remove that A, and when I drag it down, when I decrease the opacity, it's going to have an A. So that A is the alpha, so it's the alpha channel for the color. Similar to that, you have the hex code as well. So in the hex code, let's say you have the hex code as let's say zeros, that is black. For that as well, you will have a channel for that. So right now we have 6 zeros, right? When I remove the slider, when I change the slider, you will have 2 values being changed, right? Those are the values representing the opacity. Similarly, you have the HSL code as well. You can define whatever you want, but I prefer using the hex code. So along with that, the another thing here is that when you have the hex code of 6 zeros, you can do the same notations with just 3 zeros. So if you have the 6 digits which are equal, you can just define that using 3. Okay, so if you have 6 Fs, you can define the same color using 3F. But if you have a complex number, you cannot do that. So if you have the consecutively 6 same digits, and then you can short it down to 3. Okay, so that's going to do the exact same thing. So this is similar to this. So the main so another property that you generally use is the font family. Okay, so you can select the font family as well. So I prefer using sans serif as my default. You have other options as well. I think you have the Times New Roman as well. Okay, you can define that as well. So what happens when you do this is, so you have a block type of text here, right? So by default it was something like this. So observe the T here, it was default like this. When you add the font family, it's going to be changed to this block type of text. It's going to make it look a bit more professional. Okay, so other than the font family, you can give the font size, right? So we have the font size here. So the way that you use font sizes, so you have actually 4 ways of representing this. So the first way is using the pixels, which is a unit for measuring the size and width and height. Along with that you have EM and you have REM. Along with that you have the percentage. So these are the four ways that you generally use. So percentages is used to calculate it based on the percentage of the body. So whenever the body size decreases, automatically it's going to be reduced to that specific ratio based on the percentage. You can give 50%, 40%, 30%, depends on you. So pixels is the most basic version that you generally use. So apart from these two, like apart from pixels and percentages, what we have here is EM, that is M and REM. So EM and REM are actually similar in a way. So let's say you give the font size as 1 EM and save that. So you're going to have the font size like this. Let's just change it to 3 EM. So this is the font size. Okay. If you change that to REM, 3 REM, then you're going to notice no changes here. So everything is the same. But the main difference will happen when the size of the screen decreases to a mobile. So let's say you have created a website and you have deployed that onto the mobile and you have viewed that on a mobile screen. Automatically the size and width, like the width and height will be decreased, right? At that point, automatically, if you give it as EM, then the font size will be calculated based on the size of the body. Okay, not the screen size, but the body size. But if you give it as REM, then it's going to reduce the size of the font based on the browser, that is the phone size or the mobile size. Okay, so this REM is actually used to define it so that it's mobile compatible. It's more cross-platform used. Okay, so I prefer using REM and percentages as those will be actually optimized for the mobile view as well. Pixels and M are more like hard coded. Okay, so if you give it as 400 pixels, then even if the screen size is less than 400 pixels, it will go out of the screen and you will not be able to see the text. So that is not mobile compatible. It's only hard coded text. Okay, so apart from the font size, what you can define else is that you can define the width as well. You can define the width and height of the body. So you can give it as 100%, that is a full width, or you can give it as 90% or 80%. Okay, similarly you can define the height as well. It's going to be the same thing. You can give as pixels, REM, M, whatever you want, whatever unit you want to define. Okay, you can define the width and height of any element present inside the HTML, and along with that you can define the text alignment as well. So let's say you want to align the text. Okay, so text align. Then you can give the property as center or end and left and right. I think you have multiple properties, but for now let's go with center. And when you save it, automatically the text will be aligned to the center. As you can see, the heading is aligned to the center as well as the paragraph. Okay, so the paragraph has a bit of spacing on the left and right, so it's aligned to the center. But if you give that property in the h1 tag, so you can give it as h1 or the heading, you can just use the class name to define it. And if you cut and paste this inside the heading, then only that particular heading will be centered, whereas the paragraph will not be centered. As you can see, there's no gap here, but there's a gap here. So this is due to the alignment of that particular element. So this is one way of doing that. So the other property that you generally use is the border. So you can define the border for an element. So there are actually 3 main things that you define in the border. The first one is the border width. So for now, let's give it as 3 pixels. Then you're going to define the color. We are going to go for white, and white is represented using F, right? So it's going to be 6F, and the shorthand notation for that is 3F. Along with that, you can define it as solid, or you can give it as dotted or something else. So you have multiple options, but for now let's choose solid. Okay, and when you save that, you're going to see a border, a white thick border. So depending on the pixels that you give here, it's going to change. You can give rem as well. 1 rem is going to be 16 pixels. Yeah, so remember, actually I forgot to mention that earlier, 1 rem is actually equal to 16 pixels. Okay, so 2 rem is equal to 2 into 16 pixels, that is 32 pixels. So 1 pixel is the most basic unit that you generally use, whereas rem is equal to 16 pixels. So remember that. Okay, so first we have the width, then the color, then the way. So we have the solid, or you can give it as dotted as well. Then you're going to have a dotted version of the border. We have the dots here. I think there are other properties as well which you can use, but for now this is enough. Okay, so then you have other property called as border radius as well. Okay, you can define the radius. So let's give it as, let's say, 1 rem and save that. So before you had a bit of straight hard corners, right? But now you're going to have it as, you're going to have a bit of curve at the borders as well. So these are the main things, and along with that, the other thing that you generally use is the margin and padding. Okay, so what is margin and padding? So let's take an element. So we have an element. So let's take a button, for example. So we have a button placed inside the body. Okay, so right now when you define a button, it's going to look something like this. Okay, so by using margin and padding, what you can do is, let's say you want to increase the distance between the border and the text present inside the button. You can do that by using the padding. Okay, so when you define the padding and you give some, let's say, around 1 rem of padding, then automatically the distance between the border and the text present inside will be increased by 1 rem, that is 16 pixels whole round. Okay, and then like after the border, let's say you want to increase the distance from the top, then you can do that by using the margin. Okay, so if you apply the margin property and give it as 1 rem, then it's going to go 1 rem from the top and the left and the right and the bottom. So from all directions going to slide 1 rem of distance. So the margin is used to define that. So by default, headings and paragraphs will have a bit of margin to them. Okay, so the way that you can access that is by going to the browser. So open that page and right click, and you'll have the option of inspect. So in the inspect option, it's going to open the Chrome Web Developer tools. In that tool section, if you select the heading, so this is the heading that we have. So this is the HTML code that we have written. Okay, so when you click on the heading there, when you click on that, you will have an orange color there, right, from the top and the bottom. So that orange color is representing the margin. So if you click on the heading, and on the right side when you go down, you will have a box model here. So when I hover over this is the element. Okay, so this is the element, and that element doesn't have any padding right now, whereas it has a border of 3 pixels. The border is highlighted there. I think you can't see it right now. And after that border, you have the margin. So that is a margin. Okay, so for now, let's give a bit of padding as well. So inside the heading, let's give a bit of padding of, let's say, around 1 rem, and let's change the margin from default to 1 rem. So right now it's being overwritten to 1 rem. Okay, so this is what we have. So when I do the box model thing again, so when I hover over the element, so this is the main element. There's the main element. In that you have the padding. That is the padding present in between the border and the text present inside that. Then next you have the border, that is 3 pixels. And after the border, outside the border, you have the margin, which is 1 rem, that is 16 pixels. You can see the 16 notation here, right? So that is the margin. Alright guys, so that's it for the CSS part. So we are done with the CSS crash course, and in the next video, we are going to stylize the resume that we had created in the previous video. So the link for that video will be available in the description below. Go check it out if you haven't seen it till now. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, then please do subscribe. And if you like this video, then please hit the like button, because that's going to motivate me to make more free video content for you like this. And thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.